welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really foundational text of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the Śrī Caitanya-caritāmṛta, and what we're going to do is explore the unique framework the author insists you have to use to even begin to understand its profound and, let's be honest, sometimes complex spiritual claims.
So right out of the gate, the author makes this huge claim. This isn't just some philosophy or interesting speculation. No, it's presented as a direct transcription of spiritual reality, an experience that the author says can be factually realized. I mean, talk about setting a high bar for what's to come.
So you gotta ask, right? How can any book make that kind of assertion? How can it claim to be anything more than, just some experimental thoughts? Well, the author totally anticipates this skepticism and lays out a very structured answer. And here's the first crucial piece of the puzzle. This book isn't positioned as like an introduction. The author frames it as an advanced work, a postgraduate study for someone who's already mastered foundational scriptures like the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. And that's a really big deal, because this idea of prerequisite knowledge is totally key to the method of understanding that comes next.
Okay, so if you can't just figure it out on your own, then what's the secret? Well, the text argues that the key to unlocking its meaning is a specific principle of transmission called disciplic succession. And this whole idea, it's presented as the absolute foundation of the text authority.
The core idea is this: truth is preserved through a direct, person-to-person transfer. The knowledge gets passed down perfectly intact, kind of like, as the source puts it, remnants of food originally eaten by the Lord himself. It's this direct counterpoint to what the author calls newly manufactured ideas from our tiny brains.
And what's so cool here is that we can actually see the chain laid out. The author, Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami, meticulously traces this lineage all the way from the original figure, Śrī Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, down through a series of masters. So this isn't just some abstract theory. It's laid out as a documented, unbroken history of passing this knowledge down.
And this brings us to the payoff. The author states that you can only understand this stuff by receiving the knowledge through this specific chain, what's called oral reception, which basically means hearing it from the right source. The text even flat out warns you that trying to understand it any other way, any deviation from this line, will just completely bewilder your understanding of its core mystery.
All right, so you have to wonder, what is this huge truth that needs this whole elaborate system to protect it? Well, incredibly, the entire first chapter of the book is dedicated to just unpacking the meaning of one single foundational verse.
Yeah, you heard that right. It all boils down to the number 6. That one opening verse describes the absolute truth, not as just one thing, but as something that shows up in 6 distinct but totally unified transcendental expansions. And here they are. You've got the spiritual masters, the devotees of the Lord's incarnations, his plenary portions, his energies, and finally, the primeval Lord himself, who's identified as Śrī Kṛṣṇa Caitanya. And what's wild is that none of these are just simple labels, right? Each one has its own super detailed structure. For example, spiritual masters have both initiating and instructing functions. Devotees are split into apprentices and graduates. Incarnations, energies, they all have their own specific divisions too. It's not just a list, it's a whole comprehensive theological system.
Okay, but wait. This brings up a huge philosophical problem, doesn't it? How can 6 different categories all be part of one single absolute truth? How can they be separate but also unified? Well, the text doesn't shy away from this. It tackles it head-on with its core philosophy.
And that concept is called Asintya Beta Beta Tattva. Whoa, that's a mouthful, I know. But it basically translates to inconceivable oneness and difference. This is the lens, the framework for understanding the relationship between the Lord, the source of all energy, and all of his manifestations, which are all seen as his energies.
And to make this make sense, the text uses this really powerful analogy. Think about the sun and sunshine. Are they the same? Well, yeah, they're both light and heat, but are they different? Of course. One is the giant ball of fire. The other is what you feel on your skin. That's the idea here. They're fundamentally one, but functionally, they're different.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and put all of these pieces together, because what you start to see is a very deliberate step-by-step framework for how you're supposed to approach this text.
First, you have the text itself, claiming to be a factual experience, not just some idea someone cooked up. Okay, so how do you get it? That's step 2, the method. You don't just read it, you receive it through that unbroken chain, and that method unlocks the content, this idea of the absolute truth in 6 forms. And finally, you have the philosophy, that whole oneness and difference thing, which acts like the glue that holds the entire system together.
And all of this really leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending question to chew on. See, this whole system is built on the idea that truth isn't something you invent in your head, it's something you receive. So, when knowledge is framed that way, as a perfect transmission, how does that change how you think about it? What does that do to its value? It's a huge challenge to how we normally think about learning, and really it's the price of admission if you want to enter the world of the Caitanya-caritāmṛta.